I stood there in the doorway, the casserole still warm in my hands, while my daughter-in-law's words settled like frost in my chest. Most people your age would be grateful to live here rent-free. The kitchen light flickered, catching the smirk she didn't bother to hide. Rent-free. After 25 years of mortgage payments, after raising the man who now looked away in silence, I was a guest in the house I built. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. Carol balanced the casserole dish in her hands, the glass still warm through the oven mitts. The smell of baked pasta and garlic butter filled the narrow path between the main house and the guest house. A faint chill hung in the air, that kind of quiet suburban dusk where sprinklers hissed in the distance and porch lights began flickering on like small suns. She nudged open the back door with her elbow. Inside, Brittany sat at the kitchen counter, scrolling through her phone, her posture slouched, hair twisted into a careless bun. The hum of the refrigerator and the faint buzz of the overhead light gave the room an uneasy stillness. Carol tried a gentle smile. Thought you might want something easy tonight. Long day, right? Brittany didn't look up right away. Her thumb kept moving across the screen. When she finally did glance over, her tone landed sharp, cutting through the warmth Carol had brought with her. You know, she said, without even a thank you. Most people your age would be grateful just to live here rent-free. The words struck like static, soft but stinging. Carol froze, casserole still in her hands. For a moment she thought she might have misheard, but Brittany was already turning back to her phone, face lit in cold blue light. Carol blinked once, then twice. Well, she managed, voice barely above a whisper. That's generous of you to say. Brittany's shoulders lifted in a shrug that said she'd already moved on. From the living room, Mark's voice floated in. Light. Nervous. Trying to stitch the silence. Hey, anyone want to catch the game? I think the Cubs are actually winning for once. No one answered. Carol set the casserole on the counter, her movements careful, deliberate. She smoothed her hands against her apron, nodding as if everything were perfectly fine. Her face held still, but her chest felt tight, like she'd been quietly erased from her own story. Enjoy dinner, she said, her voice steady now. It's still warm. She left before anyone could say another word. Outside, the air hit her with that dry, crisp coolness of early autumn. The faint rustle of oak leaves filled the gap where Brittany's words still echoed. Carol crossed the yard slowly, the lights from the main house fading behind her. Inside the guest house, she turned on only one lamp. The soft yellow glow brushed over the neat little space. She'd made her own. A tidy kitchen, a folded quilt, a framed photo of her and Mark taken long before Brittany ever arrived. She stood by the sink, rinsing her hands though there was nothing on them. The faint scent of garlic still clung to her sleeves. Her reflection in the dark window looked back at her. Tired eyes, lips pressed thin. That girl, she whispered, but stopped herself. What good would it do? She began washing the few dishes from her own dinner, each movement quiet, rhythmic, deliberate. The sound of the faucet masked the hum in her chest, that tremor between anger and disbelief. By the time the dishes were stacked neatly to dry, she wasn't just thinking about the comment anymore. She was remembering other moments, the half-smiles, the patronizing tones, the way Brittany's presence had slowly redrawn the borders of her life. Carol dried her hands, walked to the far end of the room, and opened the file cabinet she hadn't touched in months. The metal creaked softly. Inside, between old tax folders and mortgage statements, sat a manila envelope marked in her handwriting, Deed. She pulled it out slowly, the paper cool and heavy in her hands. For a long moment she simply stared at it, tracing her own name on the document, remembering every signature, every decision that had built this place. The sound of laughter drifted faintly from the main house. Brittany's voice, high, easy, thoughtless. Carol's fingers tightened around the edge of the paper. Her reflection in the glass door caught her eye again. Calm, composed, but her eyes were alive now, sharp with something new. She folded the deed back into the envelope and set it on the table beside her. The night outside deepened, the yard gone to shadow. "Rent-free," she murmured, almost smiling this time. Then she turned off the lamp. Morning light crept through the blinds of the guest house, slicing the room into neat lines of gold and shadow. Carol sat at the small kitchen table, her coffee cooling untouched beside a stack of papers spread like cards in a game she already knew how to win. The envelope lay open, the deed visible again. Around it were older documents, refinance papers, closing statements, bank letters with faintly yellowed edges. She had kept everything, every scrap with her name on it. She wasn't sentimental about most things, but these pages had always meant something steady, something hers. She adjusted her reading glasses, tracing a finger along the header. Refinance, 2015. 10 years ago, back when the siding still gleamed fresh and Mark still came home on time. Her handwriting appeared in the margins of a few forms, small notes, reminders. She'd handled every appointment herself, met every signature with quiet care. No other names appeared beside hers. Not Mark's, not Brittany's, just Carol Ann Dorsey. A small sound escaped her, half laugh, half sigh. She leaned back in her chair, letting the realization settle like dust in a sunbeam. She remembered Brittany's first time seeing the house, how she'd run her hand along the banister, wide-eyed. "It feels like a real family home," she'd said, smiling that bright, unearned smile. Carol had said nothing then. No need to correct her. Let the girl assume what she wanted. Now, the assumption tasted bittersweet. Carol reached for her phone. The contact list scrolled beneath her finger until she found the name, Heather Snow. They hadn't spoken in months, not since the neighborhood barbecue where Heather had casually mentioned the housing market booming again. The phone rang twice before Heather answered, her voice still carrying that brisk, cheerful confidence Carol had always admired. "Carol, been forever. What's going on?" Carol hesitated, eyes drifting toward the main house through the window. Brittany's SUV was still parked out front. Mark's truck gone, as usual. The blinds upstairs were open. A shadow moved past. "I'm thinking of selling," Carol said evenly. A pause, followed by a soft, knowing hum. "The place on Hawthorne?" "Yes." "Well, that's a surprise," Heather said. "I thought you loved that home." "I did," Carol replied. She closed one of the folders and squared its edges. "Once." There was a rustle on the other end of the line, paper shifting, a pen clicking. "All right," Heather said, businesslike now. "Do you want to list it, or—" Carol's voice dropped lower, measured. "Quiet sale. No signs, no open house. Just find a buyer who doesn't ask questions." Heather gave a small laugh. "That's not my usual route, but it can be done. What's the rush?" Carol's gaze returned to the window. Brittany had stepped outside, barefoot on the porch, phone to her ear, laughter echoing across the lawn. That bright, oblivious sound again. "I want it fast," Carol said, "and not to them." Heather went silent for a long second. Then, softly, "Understood." They went over a few practicalities, valuation, escrow, timing, but Carol only half listened. Her attention had drifted to the framed photo still sitting on her counter. She reached over, turned it face down. When the call ended, she exhaled slowly, a long breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The quiet of the room returned, deeper now, more certain. She gathered the papers into a single pile, slid them back into the envelope, and tucked it neatly beneath the table runner. Outside, the morning had brightened. Sprinklers clicked on, spraying arcs of water across the yard. Brittany's laughter had faded, but Carol could still hear it, ghost-like, lingering. She stood at the window, arms crossed, eyes narrowed just slightly. In the reflection, the sunlight caught the silver streaks in her hair, the fine lines at her mouth. Not weakness, definition. Her phone buzzed again. A text from Heather. Got a lead. Cash buyer. Will handle discreetly. You sure you're ready? Carol typed back one word. Yes. Then she set the phone down beside her cooling coffee, its surface rippling slightly from the weight of her decision. Outside, the sprinklers shut off with a sharp hiss, leaving the yard glistening in silence. Carol turned from the window, her face calm, unreadable. The house she'd built would soon no longer be theirs, but it would never be Brittany's. By late afternoon, the air had that brittle brightness that comes before a storm, the kind of light that made the house on Hawthorne look almost too perfect. Carol stood on the front porch, wiping a faint sheen of flour from her palms onto her jeans. The scent of freshly baked cookies drifted through the open doorway, softening the edges of the tension that had lived in her chest for days. Her own car was parked 2 blocks away, tucked behind a line of maples. Mark wouldn't be home until 6, and Brittany had texted earlier about happy hour with the girls. That gave her 3 full hours, enough time for strangers to walk through what everyone thought was still their home. Heather's silver SUV rolled up the drive, sunlight glinting off its hood. She stepped out first, all crisp blazer and practiced smile. Behind her came a couple in their late 20s, a tall man with paint on his knuckles, a woman clutching a folder of loan pre-approvals like it was a lifeline. They paused to take in the house, the porch swing, the wide windows that caught the last rays of daylight. Heather's tone softened as she greeted Carol. You weren't kidding about wanting quiet. No one would ever guess this place is on the market. Carol smiled faintly. That's the idea. The woman leaned closer to the man. It's beautiful, she whispered. It feels peaceful. Carol stepped aside, gesturing them in. Please, make yourselves at home. Inside, sunlight stretched across the polished hardwood floors, catching in the grain like golden threads. The living room looked staged but lived in, a careful balance. Carol had left a few family photos turned face down, a few left up. Enough warmth to make it real, enough mystery to make it theirs. The man wandered toward the fireplace, tracing a hand along the mantel. Original brick? Built in 92, Carol said. She caught herself, cleared her throat. I kept the structure when we redid the walls. Most people would have torn it out. He nodded appreciatively. Glad you didn't. Has character. Heather moved through the space like a quiet conductor, opening doors, gesturing toward the kitchen, the backyard, the guest house in the distance. The young woman lingered near the counter where the cookies cooled on a tray, the smell thick with butter and sugar. Help yourself, Carol offered. The woman smiled, took one, and the warmth spread through the room again. You really kept this place spotless, she said. It feels loved. Carol met her eyes. It was. They walked through the hall, admiring the crown molding, the light that poured in through the west-facing windows. The young couple murmured to each other in low voices, about space, about potential, about how it felt right. When they reached the sliding doors overlooking the yard, Carol caught sight of her reflection, her own calm face layered over the image of the guest house beyond. For a heartbeat, she saw it all as if through their eyes, the promise, the peace, the illusion of permanence. Heather broke the silence. And the guest house out back, fully finished with plumbing and electric. You won't find that in many listings around here. The man whistled softly. Could be perfect for my studio. The woman nodded. Or an in-law suite? Carol's lips curved slightly. It's peaceful here, until people forget who built it. They both turned, uncertain if she was joking. Her smile didn't help them decide. Heather cleared her throat gently, smoothing over the tension. You'll have plenty of privacy too. The neighborhood's quiet. Everyone keeps to themselves. The couple exchanged a glance that said, "This is it." Heather knew that look. She'd seen it 100 times. When they stepped outside to take one last look at the yard, Carol lingered behind. Her hand brushed the edge of the counter, feeling the faint warmth left by the cookie tray. The ticking of the kitchen clock sounded louder now, each second deliberate. Through the window, she watched Heather hand them her card. The young woman nodded, eyes bright, already imagining curtains in the living room, maybe a swing in the yard. The deal was breathing now, alive. Carol leaned against the counter, letting the sound of distant laughter from the street fade beneath the hum of the refrigerator. Her pulse steadied. For the first time in months, the house didn't feel like it belonged to Brittany's voice or Mark's absence. It belonged to the silence, the kind she could shape. Heather re-entered, her heels soft on the tile. They're serious, cash ready, no contingencies. If you're comfortable, I'll move forward. Carol didn't answer right away. Her gaze drifted toward the staircase, the faint marks still visible where Brittany had hung her "Home Sweet Home" sign. Do it, she said finally. Heather smiled, sliding her phone into her purse. I'll draw up the paperwork tonight. As the SUV backed down the driveway, Carol watched from the porch, the wind catching at her hair. The street was quiet again. Only the scent of cookies and the faint echo of footsteps remained. She looked up at the darkening sky, a whisper of thunder rolling somewhere far off. Then she locked the front door, turned the key twice, and slipped it into her pocket. Inside, the ticking clock stopped. The next morning broke gray and damp, the kind of sky that made the neighborhood look washed out and suspended in waiting. Carol set 2 mugs of coffee on the kitchen table. One for herself, one for Heather, and slid the packet of papers across the polished wood. The faint scent of ink and rain drifted through the cracked window. Heather looked rested, efficient. 15-day close, she said, tapping her pen against the signature line. Cash buyer, clean inspection. They've already wired the earnest deposit. Carol nodded, her gaze fixed on the page. Her name appeared there again, bold and solitary. Carol Ann Dorsey. No other signatures beside it. She liked the way it looked, anchored and final. Are you sure you want to keep it quiet until closing? Heather asked, tone gentle but edged with curiosity. I'm sure, Carol said. Her voice didn't tremble. No signs, no talk, no leaks. Heather smiled faintly, admiration flickering through her eyes. You always were a woman who knew what she wanted. Carol picked up the pen. The soft scratch of ink filled the silence, a sound both delicate and irrevocable. When she finished, she capped the pen and set it neatly beside the contract. Heather slid the signed offer into her folder and stood. 15 days, she said again, then it's yours to walk away from. Or theirs to walk into, Carol replied, her tone unreadable. When Heather left, Carol stayed at the table, staring at the faint coffee ring her mug had left on the wood. Outside, the rain had turned steady, pattering against the windows in a rhythm that steadied her thoughts. That afternoon, she began moving things. Quietly, deliberately. A set of silver candlesticks wrapped in dish towels. The quilt her mother had made. Mark's watchbox. Empty except for the one piece he never noticed missing. Her jewelry, a few legal folders, the family Bible she hadn't opened in years. Each item found its way into boxes she carried to the guest house under the cover of rain. She'd done this kind of thing all her life, cleaning up without being seen. Only this time, she wasn't tidying. She was erasing herself on purpose. By the third trip, her hair had plastered to her forehead, and her jeans clung damp around the knees. She paused at the kitchen doorway, looking around. The space looked lighter already, almost ready for someone else to imagine their life here. Later, she drove to the post office, parked beneath the dripping awning, and rented a small P.O. box with a key that felt colder than she expected. The clerk didn't ask questions, just stamped the form and handed it back with a mechanical, "Have a nice day." When she returned home, Brittany's SUV was already in the driveway. Through the front window, Carol saw her at the dining table, laptop open, earbuds in, surrounded by half-empty iced coffee cups and color swatches fanned across the surface. Carol pushed open the door quietly. Brittany looked up, smiled with that easy casualness that used to disarm her. "Hey, Carol, I was thinking, we should repaint this room, maybe something lighter for summer. Don't you think?" Carol took in the sight of her, bare feet on the rug, the casual claim in her voice. She studied the swatches scattered like fallen leaves. "You think so?" she asked, tone soft. "Yeah," Brittany said, turning back to the screen. "Something fresh. We've been here long enough that it's starting to feel, I don't know, dated?" Carol nodded slowly, her expression calm. "You're probably right." She watched Brittany scroll through paint samples. Morning linen, pale birch, horizon mist. Each one a version of erasure. From outside came the faint rumble of thunder, the storm still lingering somewhere beyond the neighborhood. Carol's reflection caught in the window again, eyes steady, posture composed. She crossed to the table, gathering a few of her things that had wandered over the months: a notepad, a small ceramic vase, a letter opener shaped like a swan. Brittany didn't notice. When she reached the door, Brittany called out absently, "Oh, and Mark said maybe we should finally redo the guest house once we get around to it. It's kind of wasted space, don't you think?" Carol turned. The pause between them was brief but heavy. "Not wasted," she said. "Just used differently." Brittany smiled, distracted. "Sure." Carol stepped outside, letting the screen door close with a soft snap. The rain had stopped, leaving the world slick and shining. She breathed in the wet air, the faint metallic tang of thunder still lingering. From the porch, she could see the for sale folder peeking from her bag. In the reflection of the window, Brittany moved through the dining room, humming to herself, blissfully unaware. 15 days. The clock inside resumed its ticking, steady as a heartbeat. Carol glanced once more at the house, the one they'd soon call sold. Then she walked back toward the guest house, her shoes leaving faint, perfect prints in the damp grass. The storm had passed by dinner time, leaving the air cool and sharp. The kitchen gleamed under the recessed lights, the smell of roasted chicken and rosemary filling the quiet. Mark poured wine with the tired rhythm of habit, while Brittany set the table, humming softly, her phone lighting up beside her plate with unseen messages. Carol sat opposite them, her posture composed, her face unreadable. The tablecloth was freshly ironed, the silverware lined like soldiers. Every detail precise, controlled. Her version of calm before collision. Brittany sat, folded her napkin, and smiled in that breezy way she used when she thought she was being kind. "You know," she began, her tone light, "Mark and I were talking, and we think it might be fair if you started helping with bills. Just a little rent or something. You've been here for a while, and everything's gotten so expensive lately." The sentence hung in the air, casual and cruel all at once. Mark lifted his glass, staring into it instead of her eyes. He didn't say a word. Carol placed her fork down neatly. "Rent," she repeated, as if tasting the word for the first time. Brittany nodded. "Yeah, nothing crazy. We just figured, since you're in the guest house and we're covering property taxes and—" "You're not," Carol said quietly. Brittany blinked. I'm sorry? Carol folded her napkin in half, precise and slow. You're not covering anything, Brittany. Mark's wineglass stopped midair. Carol's voice was steady, almost gentle. You're welcome to move out when escrow closes. Brittany froze, confusion flickering first, then indignation. What? What escrow? Carol reached for her water glass, her movements unhurried. The sale closes next week, she said. You don't own this house, Brittany. I do. And it's sold. For a full second, there was nothing. Just the hum of the refrigerator, the faint tick of the clock. Then Brittany laughed. Short, incredulous. That's not funny. I wasn't joking. Her voice was soft, but something in it had weight. The kind of weight that made denial collapse under its own strain. Mark looked between them, pale, his lips parted but no words coming out. Brittany's chair scraped back sharply. You can't do that, she snapped, voice rising brittle. We live here. We have rights. Carol's expression didn't change. You had time, she said simply. You just didn't see it. Brittany pushed up from the table, her napkin falling like a white flag onto the hardwood. You think you can just sell it? Without asking us? Without even… Carol interrupted, her tone still calm but her eyes cutting through the noise. It's my name on the title. It always has been. The room seemed to tilt. Brittany's face flushed, her composure cracking. Mark! She turned on him, her voice shaking. Say something. Mark swallowed, still staring into his glass. I didn't know, he muttered. You didn't know. Brittany's laugh broke apart mid-sound. How could you not know? We've been paying bills, doing the yard, planning. Carol stood now, her chair pushing back quietly. Planning what? She asked. To repaint the living room? Redo the guest house? Claim what isn't yours? Brittany's mouth opened, but nothing came. The silence after her rage was worse than the shouting. It left her small, cornered by truth she hadn't bothered to learn. Carol gathered her plate, as if the conversation were over. Dinner's getting cold, she said softly. Brittany slammed her palm on the table. You can't do this to us. Carol looked at her, level and unwavering. I already did. Mark stood then, finally, his face pale. Carol, we need to talk about this. You should have done that years ago, she said. She carried her plate to the sink, the quiet clink of porcelain against metal ringing louder than Brittany's shallow breathing. Behind her, Brittany's voice wavered. You won't get away with this. Carol turned slightly, her reflection framed in the kitchen window, rain still glistening on the glass outside. I already have. And with that, she walked out, leaving the echo of her footsteps, the untouched wine, and the first real fracture of silence that house had ever heard. The law office sat on the corner of Main and Willow, tucked between a bakery and an insurance agency. The waiting room smelled faintly of coffee and lemon polish, the kind of sterile comfort meant to calm people who were afraid of consequences. Carol sat perfectly still in one of the leather chairs, purse clasped neatly on her lap. Across from her, Matt Dwyer, mid-40s, tie loosened, sleeves rolled, flipped through the folder she'd brought him. His eyes moved steadily over each page, the only sound the slow turning of paper. Finally, he looked up. It's clean, he said. Completely. The deed's in your name, the refinancing too. There's no co-ownership, no marital attachment, no tenancy agreement. You're within your rights to sell. Carol nodded once. I thought so. Matt leaned back in his chair. They might try to fight it emotionally, but legally? You're solid. They don't have a claim. Carol studied his face. So there's nothing they can do? Not unless you want to undo it yourself. She smiled faintly. That won't happen. He hesitated, lowering his voice. I've seen plenty of family situations turn ugly, Mrs. Dorsey. If they threaten anything, call me first. Don't engage. Carol stood, smoothing her coat. I don't intend to. Outside, the afternoon had turned crisp, sun glinting off windshields in the parking lot. She took a breath, slow and deep, the air sharp with exhaust and something close to relief. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text. Mark, can we talk? She stared at it for a moment, her reflection ghosting over the screen. Then she typed back. Carol, we should have talked years ago. She slipped the phone away, her pulse steady, her expression calm. Across town, in the warm blur of mid-morning light, Brittany was composing a Facebook post. The words came out quick and furious, typed through a haze of self-pity. Feeling betrayed. Some people forget what family means. Being forced out of our home by my MIL. Pray for us. Unfair, Schechter family drama. By the time Carol drove home, the post had gathered a scattering of comments, half sympathy, half speculation. Old friends from Brittany's Pilates class offering sad emojis. One neighbor asking, "Is this about the house?" Carol didn't check it, but Heather did. When Heather called, her voice was brisk but calm. I saw something online, she said. Don't worry about it. Buyers are steady. They don't care about noise. I'm not worried, Carol said. Good, Heather replied, because escrow's moving. Everything's clean, 10 more days. The number hung in the air like a countdown. After the call, Carol stood by the window of the guest house, looking out across the yard. Brittany's SUV was gone. Mark's truck sat parked crooked in the driveway, the hood catching the fading sunlight. She could picture them inside, voices rising and falling behind the glass, rehearsing arguments that no longer mattered. The neighborhood felt oddly still. A jogger passed by. A dog barked somewhere down the block. Ordinary life continued, unaware that this house, this perfect suburban symbol, was days away from changing hands forever. Carol moved back to the table, the folder from Matt still open beside her tea. His words echoed quietly. You're within your rights. She let them settle, not as justification, but as confirmation. This wasn't vengeance anymore, it was correction. Her phone buzzed again. Another message. This time, from Heather. Heather. Buyers asked if they could move the signing up. They're ready sooner. Carol's fingers hovered above the screen. Then she typed back. Do it. Through the glass, she saw the faint glow of light from the main house kitchen. A shadow moved inside, Brittany's silhouette pacing, phone in hand, probably refreshing her post to see who else had taken her side. Carol watched for a moment, expression still, almost tender. Then she turned off her own lamp, plunging the guest house into darkness. The yard between them gleamed faintly under the porch lights, the distance between their worlds sharper than ever. Out of that darkness, her phone buzzed one last time. Heather. Congrats, Carol. The buyers just wired the remainder. It's official. Carol's breath caught. Quiet, sharp, then steady again. Outside, the wind lifted through the oak trees, scattering the first dry leaves of fall across the yard. And in the main house, Brittany's voice broke through the night, muffled but unmistakable, high with panic. Carol didn't move toward the window. She only whispered to herself, "They're just finding out what I already knew." The clock ticked once, twice. Then silence. The courtroom smelled faintly of old paper and cold air. Sterile, detached, a place where emotion went to die under fluorescent light. Carol sat at the plaintiff's table, her hands folded over the thick leather binder in front of her. She had arrived early, as she always did, watching the lawyers and clerks shuffle papers with the weary choreography of routine. Across the aisle, Brittany whispered furiously to her attorney, a young man whose suit looked 2 sizes too big for his ambition. Her voice carried despite her effort to keep it low, sharp enough to cut through the hush. She can't just take it. She said we could stay. She promised. Mark sat beside her, head lowered, his hands clasped together. He hadn't looked at Carol once since entering the room. The bailiff called the session to order, and the murmur fell away. Judge Whitaker, a tall woman with silver hair and an expression carved from restraint, took her seat at the bench. "We're here on the matter of Dorsey versus Dorsey," she began, her tone even. "Petition regarding the contested sale of property located at 412 Hawthorne Drive. Counsel, you may proceed." Brittany's attorney rose first, adjusting his tie with the nervousness of someone who knew the case was thin. "Your Honor, my client has suffered significant emotional distress and financial uncertainty due to the unilateral actions of Mrs. Carol Dorsey, who sold the family home without consent. There was a verbal understanding, an agreement, that this property would serve as a shared residence." He turned slightly toward Brittany, prompting her cue. Brittany straightened, her eyes glassy but fierce. "We lived there, we took care of it, we made it better." She said she wanted family close. "That means something, doesn't it?" Carol didn't speak. She simply opened her binder, the quiet click of the clasp echoing faintly through the courtroom. The judge nodded toward her side. "Mrs. Dorsey, your response?" Carol rose, smooth and unhurried. "There was no agreement," she said. Her voice carried, clear and steady. "No contract, no joint ownership, and no contribution to the mortgage. The property is, and always has been, mine." The judge gestured. "Do you have documentation?" Carol slid a folder forward, the motion calm and precise. Inside, the title deed, the refinancing agreement, the closing statement, all bearing her single name. The paper landed on the judge's desk with the quiet authority of truth. Judge Whitaker scanned the pages, her expression unreadable. The opposing attorney cleared his throat. "Your Honor, verbal agreements between family members can hold weight under equity law." Carol interrupted, her tone polite but firm. "Then allow me to present something under equity as well." From her folder, she drew a printed text message, time-stamped, enlarged, clear as day. She held it out for the clerk to pass up. The judge adjusted her glasses, reading aloud. "We don't need her signature, it's our home now." The words hung in the air like smoke. Brittany's face went pale. "That's out of context." The judge raised a hand. "Quiet, please." Her eyes flicked toward Brittany's attorney. "This text alone undermines any claim of shared ownership. You can't assert reliance on a property you never legally held." Mark exhaled sharply, slumping lower in his chair. His fingers pressed against his temples, the weight of months, years, crashing down all at once. Brittany turned to him, desperate. "Say something. You were there." "You knew," she said. But he didn't lift his head. Carol watched without flinching. Not smug, not triumphant, just finished. The last thread of the web Brittany had tried to spin had finally come undone under its own arrogance. Judge Whitaker looked back toward Carol. "Mrs. Dorsey, you've provided clear documentation of ownership and lawful sale. Pending review, I see no basis to restrict or reverse the transaction." Brittany's attorney started to protest, but the judge's gavel tapped once, sharp, decisive. "You'll receive the formal ruling within 48 hours." The courtroom dissolved into low murmurs. Papers rustled. The bailiff called the next case. Carol closed her binder, the leather snapping shut with quiet finality. As she stood, she glanced briefly toward Mark, one fleeting look that held everything unsaid. Then her gaze shifted to Brittany, who sat motionless, her mouth open as though words might still come. They didn't. Outside, the courthouse steps gleamed in the sunlight, still wet from a morning drizzle. Carol descended slowly, her heels tapping against the stone. The city moved around her, cars passing, pigeons fluttering near the fountain, indifferent to the small storm that had just ended. Her phone vibrated once in her bag, a message from Heather. "Heather, Judge's ruling should post by tomorrow. Congrats, Carol. It's over. Carol stopped at the bottom step, her hand resting lightly on the railing. No, she murmured to herself. It's only starting. A breeze swept through, scattering the last of the courthouse leaves across her path. And somewhere behind her, through the echoing glass doors, Brittany's voice broke, angry, disbelieving, already plotting the next move. Carol didn't turn back. She simply walked toward the sunlight, her binder tucked close to her chest. Proof, in ink and steel, that sometimes the only justice that matters is the one you write yourself. The email came just after sunrise, a soft chime on Carol's phone that broke the stillness of her kitchen. She didn't rush to open it. She poured her coffee first, steady and slow, the rich scent curling through the quiet guest house. Then she sat down at the table and tapped the screen. Case number 24, CV 1038. Dismissed with prejudice. Reasoning: plaintiffs failed to demonstrate ownership or legal tenancy. Defendant retains sole title and right to sell. Carol exhaled once, not a sigh, not quite a smile, just release. Outside, dew clung to the grass, the kind that shimmered and disappeared before anyone noticed. The sun edged over the oak branches, lighting the main house in a pale gold glow that made it almost innocent again. Her phone buzzed again. This time, a message from Heather. Heather. Congrats, it's official. Judge Rayford signed off personally. You're free. Carol typed back. Carol. I know. Time to finish what I started. 2 hours later, she pulled into the driveway, her binder tucked under one arm, a crisp manila envelope in the other. The air was still, heavy with the hum of cicadas. Through the front window, she could see Brittany pacing with her phone pressed to her ear, her gestures sharp, animated. Mark sat at the dining table, elbows on his knees, staring into nothing. Carol didn't knock. She opened the door, stepped into the house that, for just a little longer, was still hers. Brittany turned. "What are you doing here?" she snapped. Her voice was hoarse, her mascara faintly smudged. "We're talking to a lawyer." "You might want to save your money," Carol said calmly. "The court already did." Brittany blinked, the fight freezing on her face. "What?" Carol set the envelope down on the counter between them. "Judge Rayford dismissed your case. His words, not mine. If you're not on the deed, you're not entitled to squat." The sentence landed heavy and hard in the silent kitchen. Mark's head lifted. Brittany's mouth opened, then shut again. "That's not... He can't just..." Brittany's voice broke. "You can't throw us out. This is our home." Carol's tone remained even, almost gentle. "It was never yours, Brittany. It was borrowed space. And the borrowing is over." She slid a second envelope from the binder and placed it beside the first. 30-day notice to vacate. You'll find it's fully compliant and legally binding. I suggest you start packing." Brittany let out a choked sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "I'll call my lawyer." "You've already called 3, Carol said, "and they all told you the same thing." Brittany's cheeks flushed. "You're evil," she spat. "You lied to us. You pretended to care." Carol looked at her for a long moment. "I cared," she said softly. "That was my mistake." Mark stood slowly, the weight of everything pressing into his posture. "Carol," he said, his voice low. "I didn't know. I swear I had no idea what she was, what any of this." Carol's gaze met his, steady but tired. "That was the problem, Mark." For a moment, the silence between them was thicker than anything that had passed before. Years of avoidance, of small betrayals stacked like bricks between them. Brittany's phone buzzed again on the counter. No one moved to answer it. Carol turned to leave, her heels clicking softly on the hardwood. At the doorway, she paused and looked back. 30 days, she repeated. Not one more. Then she was gone. Outside, the afternoon had begun to thicken with heat. The air smelled faintly of cut grass and the distant whir of lawnmowers. Carol walked across the yard toward the guest house, her steps deliberate, the manila folder still tucked under her arm. Behind her, through the open window, Brittany's voice erupted again. Loud, frantic, the sound of someone fighting a battle already lost. Mark said nothing. At her doorstep, Carol paused and looked back once more. The house gleamed under the noon sun, beautiful, emptying, finished. She unlocked the door, stepped inside, and closed it behind her. Her phone buzzed again, another message from Heather. Heather. Buyers confirmed move-in for the 10th. Need final key handoff next week. You okay with that? Carol typed one word. Carol. Yes. She set the phone face down, leaned back in her chair, and let the silence settle around her like armor. But through the glass, she could still see Brittany in the main house, pacing, shouting, her movements desperate and jagged, like someone trying to stop the tide with her bare hands. Carol took a sip of her coffee, cool now, bitter. Then, almost to herself, she said, 30 days will pass faster than she thinks. The clock on the wall ticked once, sharp and final, as outside the first moving truck turned slowly onto Hawthorne Drive. The morning of closing came quiet and blue. No wind, no sound, but the low hum of a world going on as if nothing extraordinary were ending. Carol dressed simply in pressed slacks and a navy sweater, her hair neatly pinned back. She brewed one last cup of coffee in the guest house, savoring the stillness that had once felt like exile and now felt like control. Heather arrived right on time, her silver SUV pulling into the drive with its usual grace. The buyers followed behind, a couple with bright eyes and plans that stretched years ahead. Carol watched them step out, saw the way their faces lit at the sight of the house. Heather greeted her with a warm, practiced smile. Morning, Carol. Congratulations. It's all official now. Just the keys and signatures. Carol nodded, holding out the small ring of brass keys. They glinted in the sunlight, the sound of them soft but final as they dropped into the buyer's palm. Feels strange, doesn't it? Heather said gently. Carol thought for a moment. Not strange, she said. Just finished. The young woman reached out a hand. We promise to take good care of it. It's beautiful. Carol smiled, and for once it wasn't forced. I know you will. By mid-afternoon, the papers were signed, the funds transferred, and the home she'd built 25 years ago no longer carried her name. Carol slid the closing folder into her bag and thanked Heather again before walking to her car. As she pulled out of the lot, her phone buzzed. Brittany. The name glowed against the dash, unanswered. She didn't need to hear the voice to know the tone, shrill, accusing, desperate. Instead, she turned onto the long road that cut through town, past the hardware store and the school where she'd once volunteered, until the familiar skyline faded behind her. Her destination wasn't far. A quiet street lined with oak trees, the kind that arched high enough to touch power lines. She pulled into the driveway of a small white bungalow. New paint, tidy porch, a yard half the size but twice as peaceful. Paid in full, no mortgage, no noise. Heather had called it a fresh start. Carol called it manageable. As she stepped inside, the air was cool and still, faintly smelling of cedar and new beginnings. The boxes were already stacked neatly against the wall. Books, linens, the silver candlesticks, her mother's quilt. Everything she'd kept fit neatly into the space. The realtor had left a small note on the counter with a bow around the keys. Welcome home. Carol placed her purse on the table, took a long breath, and looked around. No memories lived here yet. No voices, no echoes. Just possibility. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from Brittany. Brittany. So you're just leaving? Running away after ruining everything? Coward. Carol typed back one line. Carol. Just downsizing. Then she put the phone face down and walked outside. The afternoon sun had softened by then, spilling gold across the rooftops. On her way to pick up a few things from the hardware store, she couldn't resist taking the long route past Hawthorne Drive. From the corner, she could see the moving truck parked halfway up the drive, the back doors flung open. Boxes stacked unevenly on the porch. Brittany stood on the front steps, hair tied up, barking orders at Mark, who moved with the exhaustion of a man still trying to pretend it wasn't over. They hadn't noticed her yet. Carol watched from a distance, expression unreadable. Heather's car rolled by, window down. She slowed just enough to wave, her smile proud, approving. Carol returned the gesture, a small nod, nothing more, and continued on. The street was alive with the sounds of new ownership, laughter, clinking tools, the faint echo of possibility. Carol drove a few more blocks, turned right, then left, down a lane so narrow it barely fit her car. The GPS chimed softly. "You've arrived." She smiled. The small bungalow sat on the next block, quiet, shaded, its backyard separated by a single line of old oak trees. Beyond them, through the shifting branches, she could just make out the roofline of the house she'd sold. Her old house, her new backyard. Carol stepped out, walking to the edge of her property where the fence didn't quite meet the tree line. Through the leaves, she saw Brittany slam a car door, her voice carrying faintly through the air. Carol smiled. Not wide, not cruel, just certain. She reached into her pocket, feeling the cool shape of her new keys. "Downsizing," she murmured. "Not disappearing." The breeze moved through the trees, carrying the sound of her old wind chime, the one Brittany had once complained was too noisy. Now it sang for her again. Carol stood there for a long moment listening, the setting sun cutting through the branches in stripes of gold and shadow. The house she'd built and the house she'd chosen faced each other across the quiet divide, close enough for her to see everything that came next. The mornings were quieter on Elm Court, the kind of quiet that didn't need permission. Carol sat on her new patio, the wrought iron table still smelling faintly of fresh paint, her mug of coffee steaming against the cool September air. The oak trees between her and Hawthorne swayed lazily, revealing through the gaps the roofline she knew by heart. Her old house. Her new view. From here, she could see just enough, the outline of the back porch, the shimmer of that same wind chime she had refused to take down. It clinked softly whenever the breeze shifted, a sound that belonged to her long before anyone else had claimed it. She took a slow sip of coffee and smiled to herself. The buyers were settling in nicely. Their laughter carried faintly through the leaves, light and domestic. But further beyond the fence and the oak line, there was movement. A flash of red hair. Brittany. Carol leaned back, content to watch the scene like an old movie. Around 10, she heard footsteps on the gravel path. A woman appeared. Short hair, kind eyes, balancing 2 paper cups in a cardboard holder. "Hi there," she called cheerfully. "I'm Anya. I run the cafe down on Main. You must be the new neighbor in the white bungalow." Carol smiled and rose slightly from her chair. "That's me, Carol." Anya handed her one of the cups. "Welcome to the block. Best coffee in town, first one's on me." Carol accepted it gratefully. "You might be right about that," she said, taking a sip. It was bold and smooth, the kind that lingered. Anya pulled out the other chair. "Mind if I sit?" "Please do." They talked easily, about weather, about how quiet this side of town was, about how Elm Court stayed out of the drama that sometimes rolled through Hawthorne Drive. Carol listened more than she spoke, her words careful, balanced, just enough to sound open without revealing anything. At one point, Anya leaned back, glancing toward the tree line. "You've got a lovely view," she said. Carol's eyes followed hers, the corners of her mouth curving slightly. "Yes," she murmured. I like to keep an eye on what I used to care for. Anya tilted her head, curious but polite enough not to pry. Well, it's a good block, she said at last. Quiet neighbors. Mostly. Carol nodded. Mostly. By mid-afternoon, the temperature had risen. Carol was trimming the small rosebush by her fence when she heard it. Brittany's voice, sharp and unmistakable, carried on the wind from across the trees. At first, she didn't look. She clipped one more branch, dusted off her hands. Then curiosity tugged. She stepped closer to the fence line. Through the leaves, Brittany stood in the old backyard, hands on her hips, a phone tucked between her shoulder and ear. Her words came out clipped, impatient, complaining about contractors, about movers, about the mess Carol left behind. The sight was almost poetic. Brittany turned then, just enough for her eyes to catch movement through the trees. Their gazes met. Her face went still, mouth parting in disbelief. Carol lifted her hand in an easy, almost neighborly wave. Brittany froze. The phone slipped from her shoulder. She caught it clumsily, pressed it back to her ear, and turned away without returning the gesture. Her shoulders tensed, her voice sharp again, louder this time, as if to drown the realization that Carol was still there. Carol smiled faintly, the expression soft, but edged. She returned to her pruning, each snip deliberate, rhythmic, unhurried. That evening, as the light thinned into amber, there was a knock at her door. A hesitant one. Carol opened it to find Mark standing on her porch, a grocery store bouquet in his hands, daisies, slightly wilted at the edges. He looked older, tired in a way that no court could fix. "Hi," he said awkwardly. "I thought I'd stop by. You moved so close I figured, well, it seemed rude not to." Carol studied him a moment, her expression unreadable. "How thoughtful," she said. "Come in if you'd like. The porch is fine, too." He stepped inside, looking around as though he'd stepped into a memory remade. "It's nice," he said. "Simple. Manageable," she corrected. He nodded, holding out the flowers. "Brittany doesn't know I'm here." "I assumed. She's not taking it well. The move, the sale, seeing you here. She thinks you did this to hurt her." Carol set the flowers gently in a vase, filling it halfway with water. "That's one interpretation." "She doesn't understand," Mark said quietly. "Honestly, I'm not sure I do either. Why here? Why stay so close?" Carol met his eyes, the faintest trace of something unreadable in her expression. Pity, maybe, or clarity. "Because," she said, "I spent 25 years watching that house fall apart. It's only fair I get to see it rebuild itself. Without me." Mark looked down, the silence between them thick with things that would never be said. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "I know," she replied. "That's what makes it worse." He opened his mouth as if to say more, but she was already turning toward the door. "You should go. Brittany's waiting." He nodded, stepping out onto the porch. "She saw you, you know. She's furious." Carol smiled faintly. "Good. It means she noticed something other than herself." Mark hesitated, then walked away. Carol stayed by the open door, watching him disappear into the thinning light. The wind picked up again, rustling through the oaks, carrying faint echoes of laughter from the new owners next door. When she closed the door, the sound of the wind chime followed her in. Light, steady, familiar. She stood in the middle of her quiet bungalow, the glow from the porch spilling across the floor, and whispered to no one in particular. Now the real peace begins. Outside, the chimes sang on, clear, defiant, and entirely hers. By early October, the leaves along Hawthorne Drive had begun to turn, burnished copper and pale gold, and Carol's mornings were spent beneath them, coffee in hand, pruning the garden she'd started from scratch. The sound of hammers and raised voices drifted faintly from beyond the oaks. She didn't need to look to know who it was. Brittany had a new project. It started with a sign. For rent. Fully furnished guest suite. Carol had spotted it tacked crookedly to the fence one morning, a printed flyer flapping weakly in the wind. She'd smiled. Small, knowing, and gone back to trimming her lavender. Within a week, the first tenant showed up. A young woman with a duffel bag, greeted at the curb by Brittany's sugar-sweet tone and Mark's reluctant wave. But the stay didn't last long. By Wednesday, 2 official-looking SUVs rolled up. The city seal glinted on their doors. From her patio, Carol heard it unfold, the clipped voices of code enforcement, the brittle edges of Brittany's protest. Zoning prohibits short-term rentals, one officer explained, voice calm but firm. This property is not licensed for multifamily use. Who owns the unit? Brittany's voice cracked. We do. I mean, we bought the whole place. Then you should have known, the officer said. Through the trees, Carol caught a glimpse of Brittany's flushed face, her gestures sharp and frantic as the officers took notes. One of them pointed toward the guest house. The other shook his head. Within minutes, they were gone, leaving a silence almost too heavy to enjoy. The next morning, the for rent sign lay crumpled in the grass. By the end of the week, a contractor's van idled in the driveway. Carol leaned against her porch railing, arms folded, watching as men carried out half a kitchenette, sink, counter, the small fridge she'd left behind. The sound of metal scraping concrete rang through the air like distant applause. She could almost hear her own voice from months ago, quiet and precise, asking the zoning board to declassify the secondary dwelling for personal storage. It had taken one form, one signature, and 2 days to make it permanent. Now, it was paying dividends. By dusk, the guest house was empty. Again. Inside the main house, tension rippled through the windows. Mark's tone was low, apologetic. Brittany's, sharp and breaking. You knew she'd done this, Brittany accused. You had to know. I didn't, Mark said wearily. But maybe it's for the best. We can't afford repairs and rent, Britt. We should just... Don't say it, she snapped. We are not renting. I am not living in someone else's house. The silence that followed cracked like glass. Carol turned away from the view, the faint sound of the wind chime brushing her shoulder as she walked back toward her patio. Saturday arrived bright and windless, the perfect day for a garden tea. Carol had sent handwritten invitations to her neighbors on Elm Court and Hawthorne alike. Even Anya came, bringing lemon tarts from the cafe and gossip about the kerfuffle down the street. Carol played the gracious host effortlessly. The table was dressed in linen, the teapot steaming, the scent of chamomile and sugar mingling with the cool air. Laughter rippled easily around her yard. When one neighbor leaned close and whispered, "You must miss your old place," Carol smiled, serene. "Not really," she said. "I still have a lovely view." A few chuckled politely, none realizing how literal her words were. Through the trees, she could see Brittany's figure pacing in the backyard, phone pressed to her ear, face red and drawn. Each step was a stomp, each word lost to distance but heavy with frustration. Mark appeared briefly in the doorway, watching her without moving to stop her. Carol lifted her cup, the porcelain warm against her palm. Anya followed her gaze. "Friends of yours?" Carol's eyes didn't leave the scene. "Neighbors," she said lightly. "We have... history." Anya nodded, sipping her tea. "You have a way of sounding calm about things that would drive most people mad." Carol's smile deepened just enough to show the truth beneath it. "That's because I stopped fighting for peace," she said. "I started owning it." Across the fence, Brittany shouted something, her voice cracking, desperate, a sound torn between fury and disbelief. Carol clinked her spoon gently against her cup, the tiny sound sharp and perfect. The laughter of her guests swelled again, drowning out the chaos beyond the trees. But her eyes stayed fixed on that house, the one she'd built, lost, and still somehow ruled from the quiet safety of her garden. When the last guest rose to leave, Carol remained seated, tracing a finger around the rim of her cup, listening to the faint echo of the wind chime. Rent, she murmured softly to herself, the word curling like smoke. She set the cup down, eyes bright with calm amusement. They never earned it. The cafe on Main smelled like comfort. Espresso, cinnamon, and something faintly sweet that clung to the wooden tables. Carol had started coming every morning around 8, always to the same corner seat beneath the chalkboard menu. By the third week, she didn't need to order anymore. Anya would simply slide a steaming mug and a blueberry scone across the counter with a knowing smile. "Your usual, Carol, and don't think I didn't notice you smiling when you walked in," Anya teased, brushing flour from her apron. Carol smiled back, settling into her seat. "Maybe I'm just learning to start the day right." Anya winked. "Or maybe you like watching Hawthorne gossip from a safe distance." It was true. The cafe had become a small-town square of conversation. Contractors, teachers, retirees, each with a fresh rumor and a soft spot for a good story. Carol listened, half participant, half observer, sipping slowly while snippets of lives swirled around her like radio chatter. When Heather appeared one morning, perfectly put together as always, she drew glances from every table. "Well, look who's become our neighborhood celebrity," she said, placing a glossy folder beside Carol's plate. Carol laughed. "You mean your best repeat client?" "Let's just say you've inspired a few others to clean house. Literally," Heather said, tapping the folder. "Market report. Home values on Hawthorne jumped 12% since your sale." Carol arched an eyebrow. "So I started a trend? More like a wake-up call," Heather replied. "Turns out taking back your piece is contagious." Anya brought over 2 refills. "If you two start flipping houses, I'll expect a cafe in each one," she joked. Carol lifted her cup. "You'll be the first investor." The 3 women laughed, the sound easy and genuine. For the first time in years, Carol realized how much she'd missed laughter that wasn't strained, wasn't a performance. By late autumn, she'd begun tutoring neighborhood kids after school. It started with a simple favor. Anya's niece needed help with English essays, and grew into a small circle of eager faces gathered around Carol's kitchen table twice a week. They brought notebooks, questions, and an energy that filled her quiet bungalow with life. She corrected grammar and coaxed shy voices into reading aloud, the way she once had when her son was small. "You make it sound like stories matter," one girl said softly after class. Carol smiled. "They do, especially the ones you get to rewrite." The seasons turned gently. The trees thinned, the days shortened, but her routine stayed steady. Mornings at the cafe, afternoons in the garden, evenings with her small group of students or a book and a glass of wine. She'd built something simple, something hers. Then one morning in December, her phone buzzed while she sat by the window, sunlight cutting across the floor in sharp, pale stripes. A message preview flashed, "Mark Dorsey." No message, just her name in the text field. Nothing else. For a moment, her chest tightened, not from pain, but recognition. He still couldn't say what needed saying. She set the phone face down, the screen dimming to black. Outside, the wind chimes stirred faintly, the sound small but sure. She didn't delete the message. She just didn't answer. At the cafe that afternoon, Heather stopped by again, clutching a bright scarf against the cold. "You look good," she said. "Peace suits you." Carol smiled. "It's less demanding company than people." Not all people, Anya called from behind the counter. Carol raised her cup in mock salute. Present company excluded. Laughter rippled through the room again, warm and familiar. It no longer surprised her how easy this new rhythm felt, how much lighter the world had become once she'd stopped trying to hold it all up. Still, sometimes, when the laughter faded and the cafe quieted for the afternoon lull, her gaze would drift toward the window, where the reflection of the street shimmered against the glass. Beyond the oak trees, she knew, her old house stood, occupied, repainted, but never entirely out of reach. She didn't miss it. She just remembered it. Anya returned with a plate of scones. "You know," she said, lowering her voice, "you should host something here one night. A reading, maybe. You've got stories in you." Carol tilted her head, intrigued. "Maybe I do." The thought lingered as she walked home under the soft glow of holiday lights. The air smelled of pine and distant wood smoke. Her phone buzzed again once inside. This time, an alert from Heather. Heather. Guess who just listed their place on Hawthorne? Carol's breath caught. She opened the message to see a familiar photo. Brittany and Mark's old house, now dressed in professional staging and the words, "For sale." Outside through the trees, a moving van's headlights cut briefly across her yard. Carol stood at her window, one hand resting on the sill, the faintest smile tracing her lips. "Full circle," she whispered. The wind chime answered, soft and bright. Winter pressed in quietly that year, soft gray mornings and afternoons that ended before 5. Carol's world had found a rhythm, measured, content, but the echo of old fights still lingered somewhere down Hawthorne Drive. She'd learned to recognize the distant clatter of that house in turmoil the same way one recognizes thunder on the edge of a storm. Inevitable, far away, and no longer dangerous. It came to her not with noise, but with an envelope. Heather stopped by the cafe one morning, cheeks flushed from the cold, a manila folder tucked under her arm. "Thought you'd want to see this," she said, sliding it across the table. "The appeal ruling came through this morning." Carol wiped her hands on a napkin, opened the folder, and read. "Appeal denied. No evidence of co-ownership, financial contribution, or equitable interest. Plaintiffs to pay defendants' legal fees in full." The judge's signature ran sharp and final beneath the printed lines. Carol closed the folder, set it aside, and took a slow sip of her coffee. "And that's that," she said softly. Heather smiled, half relief, half disbelief. "You realize this means you've won twice now?" "I realized I'd already won," Carol replied. "This just puts it in writing." By that afternoon, the news had reached Hawthorne Drive. Brittany's fury moved through the neighborhood like static, snatches of shouting through half-open windows, blinds snapping shut, the sharp slam of a car door. Then silence. Within days, their savings account, whatever was left of it, had been frozen pending the payment of court costs. The new "for sale" sign tilted slightly in the cold wind, its corners battered by sleet. From her own porch, Carol could just make out the outline of the house, emptying faster now. Each truckload that left seemed to scrape another layer of pretense off the facade. When the refund check arrived a week later, clean, printed, unremarkable, she didn't cash it right away. She tucked it into her coat pocket, carried it to the cafe the next morning, and laid it on the counter in front of Anya. "For the reading fund," she said simply. Anya blinked. "Carol, this is too much. You can't just—" "I can," Carol interrupted, smiling. "It was never about the money. It was about the message." Anya looked at her, speechless, then reached out to hug her across the counter. "You're something else," she murmured. "I'm just done being quiet," Carol said. By the end of the week, Anya's post had gone up. When a woman donates her legal settlement to help local kids learn to love reading, that's the kind of story our town should tell. Thank you, Carol Dorsey, for reminding us that strength can sound like kindness. It started small, shared by cafe regulars, then parents, then teachers. Within 2 days, it was everywhere. The local paper ran a story. A morning radio host mentioned it between weather updates. A retired teacher left a handwritten note at Carol's table. "You're the kind of example we needed around here." Carol took it all in stride, as she always did. Smiling, polite, never once offering more detail than anyone needed. But across the trees, the silence grew thicker. Brittany's social media accounts vanished one by one. Her name stopped appearing in comment sections. Her voice, so loud, so constant, had gone completely quiet. Mark, rumor had it, was staying with his brother in Portland. The house stood hollow again. Late one evening, as Carol was locking up after tutoring, her phone buzzed with a number she didn't recognize. The message was short, formal. "City of Eugene, Community Engagement Board. You've been nominated for the Eugene Community Advocate Award for Outstanding Contribution to Literacy and Youth Programs." Carol read it twice, her breath stilling in the quiet. Then, slowly, a smile broke across her face, smaller than triumph, but deeper than satisfaction. She set the phone down on the counter beside her half-empty teacup and glanced toward the window. The oaks beyond were bare now, their branches black against the fading sky. Through them, she could still see the faint outline of her old house. Dark, empty, silent. For a moment, she almost felt sorry for Brittany. Almost. Then the wind picked up, sending the sound of her chime dancing through the cold. Carol reached up, adjusted the teacup on the shelf beside it, and whispered, "Justice with interest." The chime answered, clear as glass. And outside, down on Hawthorne, a "Sold" sticker had just been slapped across the sign. Spring came early that year, washing the city in color. Dogwoods bloomed along the sidewalks, and the river through downtown shimmered like a polished mirror. The invitation had arrived weeks ago, tucked neatly in an envelope with the city seal pressed into its corner. "The City of Eugene invites you to speak at the annual Community Advocate Ceremony." Carol had read it twice, then folded it carefully, setting it beside her teacup. She hadn't said yes immediately, but something inside her, the quiet certainty that had carried her through the storm, told her it was time to step forward, not just away. The city center was filled with light that morning. The glass walls, catching reflections of cherry blossoms outside. Folding chairs stretched across the room, occupied by familiar faces, teachers, small business owners, volunteers. At the front, a modest podium stood beneath a banner that read, "Building Better Together." Carol smoothed the creases in her linen jacket and looked out across the crowd. Anya sat near the front, camera in hand, next to Heather, who was dressed, as always, like she'd just stepped off a magazine cover. They both waved when Carol's name was announced. As she took the stage, a hush rippled through the room. She didn't bring notes. She didn't need them. "I used to think strength meant endurance," she began, her voice calm, low, but sure. "That if I could just stay quiet long enough, the world would correct itself. But it doesn't. Not until you stop letting it write your story for you." A murmur of agreement moved through the crowd. "I learned something else," she continued. "Boundaries aren't walls. They're invitations. For others to treat you right, and for you to treat yourself with the dignity you forgot you deserved." She paused, her gaze sweeping the audience, catching eyes that glimmered with understanding. "I'm not here because I fought someone," she said softly. "I'm here because I stopped fighting myself. I learned that peace doesn't come from pleasing everyone. It comes from respecting yourself enough to say no, even when no one claps for it." The room was still for a long heartbeat. Then someone began to clap. Then another. Then everyone. The sound grew, echoing off the glass and concrete until it filled the room completely. People stood. Neighbors, teachers, strangers. A standing ovation. Carol didn't bow. She just smiled. Small, genuine, full. From the stage, she scanned the crowd once more. No flash of red hair, no familiar slump of shoulders. Brittany and Mark were nowhere to be seen. The empty seats in the back row stayed that way. Somehow, it made the applause feel purer. When it finally quieted, she stepped down from the stage. Heather met her first, hugging her tight. "You made them feel something," she whispered. "That's rare." Carol smiled. "It's not feeling they're missing. It's permission." Anya appeared next, holding a small brown gift bag. "Before you disappear into the crowd," she said, grinning, "a little something from the cafe crew." Carol reached inside and pulled out a ceramic mug, simple white, hand-lettered in soft gray script. "Grateful doesn't mean quiet." Carol turned it over in her hands, her thumb tracing the words. "It's perfect." "Custom order," Anya said. "Figured it suited you better than any plaque." Carol chuckled softly, tucking it safely under her arm. "You figured right." They lingered near the windows as the ceremony wrapped up, watching as sunlight spilled through the cherry blossoms outside, scattering pink petals across the pavement. Later, that afternoon, she placed the mug on her kitchen shelf, right beside the wind chime she'd brought in for safekeeping and the teacup from her first donation check. Together, they looked like chapters of something whole. She brewed a fresh cup of coffee and carried it out to the patio. The air smelled like rain and earth, like the kind of renewal that doesn't ask permission to begin again. Through the trees, her old house was visible only in fragments now. New paint, new faces, life moving on without her, exactly as it should. Carol lifted the mug, took a sip, and smiled. The breeze picked up, brushing through the branches, tugging faintly at the chime by the door. She closed her eyes, letting the sound wash over her. Steady, light, unbroken. It wasn't triumph anymore. It was peace, finally earned and wholly hers. And as the afternoon light deepened, she whispered, almost to herself, "Not quiet. Never again." The wind answered, carrying the echo of her own words back through the trees. By late spring, the garden had come alive, daisies thick along the fence line, lavender brushing the breeze, and the soft buzz of bees moving lazily through the morning light. Carol knelt in the soil, hands dirt-streaked and steady. Every bloom, every blade felt intentional, cultivated, not inherited. She'd learned that kind of peace wasn't free. It was earned one decision at a time, one refusal at a time, one silence that finally meant strength instead of surrender. Across the yard, her new neighbors waved from their porch, a young couple with a baby and a golden retriever that barked at everything except her. "Morning, Carol," they called. She waved back, smiling. "Morning." They liked her instantly when she moved in, brought over cookies, asked her about gardening, never pried about why she lived alone, or why she smiled every time the wind caught the chime by her door. The old Hawthorne house had long since faded from her daily view. Its new owners had repainted it a deep slate blue, added a swing to the porch, and planted tulips where Brittany's SUV once sat. It was no longer her story, and she was grateful for that. But the town hadn't forgotten. The story had become something of a quiet legend. The woman who sold her house, found her peace, and built something new from the wreckage. It wasn't gossip anymore. It was folklore. At the cafe, a new display sat by the counter. Local of the month, Carol Dorsey. Anya had insisted on it, complete with a photo of Carol holding a trowel, smiling into the sun, and a quote painted beneath it in chalk. "Peace grows where you plant it." Carol had laughed when she first saw it. "You make me sound like a bumper sticker," she said. Anya grinned. You earned it. Besides, people love your story. You've made peace. Look, possible. Peace is possible, Carol said. You just have to stop apologizing for wanting it. That Saturday, Heather appeared in her driveway, with a bottle of white wine and a grin that meant she'd closed another deal. I figured we had something to celebrate, she said, waving the bottle. Your little bungalow? It's already gone up 15% in value. You're sitting on prime property, Carol. Carol laughed softly, brushing dirt from her hands. I told you daisies were a good investment. Heather followed her through the garden to the patio, where sunlight filtered through the oaks, dappled and warm. Carol fetched 2 glasses from the kitchen, set them down between pots of rosemary and mint, and poured. The wine glimmered pale gold in the light. To peace, Heather said, raising her glass. To perspective, Carol answered. They clinked softly, the sound carrying through the yard like a small bell. As they sat in comfortable silence, the world around them moved in gentle rhythms. The neighbor's wind chime, the rustle of leaves, laughter from a block away. A year ago, that same quiet would have felt heavy, like waiting for something to happen. Now, it just was. Heather looked around, smiling. You really did it, you know. You got everything back without ever losing your grace. Carol glanced at her, the faintest glint of humor in her eyes. Grace is overrated. I just stopped saying yes to people who confused kindness with weakness. Heather chuckled. Still, you turned the whole story around. Carol leaned back, her face tilted toward the sunlight, the breeze stirring her hair. No, she said softly. I just ended it on my terms. The afternoon light grew warmer, the shadows stretching across the yard. The air smelled of mint and earth, and distant lilacs. Heather stood to leave, but Carol stayed seated, swirling what was left of her wine, her gaze on the garden she'd built. Orderly, alive, unbothered. The sound of the chime drifted across the yard, blending with the laughter of the neighbors next door. Carol smiled, quiet, certain, content. Then, almost to herself, she said, I didn't raise my voice. I just raised the property value. The chime rang once, clear and bright, as if in applause. And for the first time in years, Carol didn't look back at anything, only forward.